The dust swirled across the barren street of Willow Creek as Hannah Parker struggled against the coarse rope binding her wrists to the weathered hitching post, the skin beneath raw and bloodied from her futile attempts at freedom. The year was 1876, and the frontier town that had seemed like a promising fresh start just 3 days prior had quickly revealed its darker underbelly when Wade Simmons and his gang decided she knew too much about their planned bank robbery. The relentless Arizona sun beat down upon her uncovered head, her once elegant bonnet trampled in the dirt nearby, her throat parched beyond what she thought humanly possible. 18 hours she'd been there left to die by outlaws who'd laughed at her pleas for mercy. The townspeople had long since shuttered their windows and doors, too afraid of Simmons' reputation to offer assistance. Hannah's vision blurred as the sound of approaching hoofbeats penetrated her haze of pain and thirst. A large black stallion slowed to a stop before her, the rider's face obscured by the setting sun at his back. She squinted upward, expecting another of Simmons' men come to torment her further. "Madam," came a low, steady voice as the stranger dismounted in one fluid motion. The tall figure approached cautiously, and Hannah could now make out a weather-beaten face with piercing blue eyes beneath the brim of a dusty brown hat. "Seems you've found yourself in a spot of trouble." Without waiting for a response, he produced a hunting knife from his belt and moved behind the post. Hannah flinched as the cold metal touched her skin, but the tension of the ropes immediately began to give way. "My name's Matthew Quinn," he said as he worked the blade through the thick bindings. "Don't reckon I need to ask who did this to you." Hannah nearly collapsed as the final strand gave way, her legs buckling after supporting her weight for so long. Strong hands caught her before she hit the ground. "Simmons," she managed to croak through cracked lips. Matthew nodded grimly, supporting her weight as he guided her toward his horse. In the distance, shouts erupted from the saloon at the end of the street. "They've spotted us," he muttered, lifting her effortlessly onto his stallion before mounting behind her. "Ride with me to safety, miss. Can you hold on?" Hannah nodded weakly, feeling the solid warmth of his chest against her back as his arm encircled her waist. The stallion lurched forward at Matthew's command, powerful muscles bunching beneath them as they thundered down the street. Gunshots cracked through the air as Wade Simmons and 3 of his men burst from the saloon, scrambling for their horses. Matthew leaned forward, urging his mount faster, while keeping Hannah secure against him. "They're giving chase," he said close to her ear, his voice remarkably calm despite the danger. "Just stay with me. Thunder here is the fastest horse in 3 territories." They raced out of town, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake. Hannah clung to the saddle horn, her body aching but her spirit sparked with a desperate hope that had been absent just minutes before. The stallion's powerful strides ate up the distance between Willow Creek and the looming silhouette of rocky foothills ahead. As they entered a narrow canyon, Matthew guided Thunder into a hidden trail that wound upward through scrubby brush and jagged boulders. The sounds of pursuit grew fainter behind them. "There's a spring up ahead," Matthew said. "We'll stop there briefly. You need water." Hannah tried to speak, but could only manage a raspy cough. She felt lightheaded, the world tilting precariously around her as Matthew guided them to a small, sheltered alcove where water trickled from the rocks into a clear pool. He dismounted quickly and lifted her down, supporting her weight as he helped her to the water's edge. Hannah drank gratefully, the cool liquid like heaven on her parched throat. "Not too fast," Matthew cautioned, his hand gentle on her shoulder. Small sips at first. When she had drunk her fill, he dampened his bandana and carefully wiped the dirt and blood from her face and wrists. In the fading light, Hannah could better see her rescuer, perhaps 30 years old, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days' worth of stubble, and those striking blue eyes that seemed to catch what little light remained. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice stronger now though still rough. Matthew refilled his canteen before answering. "Been tracking Simmons for 6 months. I'm a bounty hunter, miss."
Parker.
Hannah Parker. Miss Parker. Simmons and his gang robbed a stagecoach last winter. Killed 4 people, including my brother. His jaw tightened momentarily. But even if that weren't the case, I couldn't ride past a woman in distress. The sound of distant hoofbeats interrupted them. Matthew quickly doused the dampened areas of soil with dirt to hide evidence of their stop. They're persistent, he muttered. We need to move. Think you can ride a while longer? Hannah nodded, determination replacing some of her exhaustion. Yes. Within moments they were back on Thunder, climbing higher into the hills as darkness settled around them. Hannah leaned against Matthew's solid frame, drawing strength from his steady presence. Despite her ordeal and the danger still pursuing them, she felt something she hadn't expected safe. They rode through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horse. Matthew kept them to rocky ground when possible, crossing streams to mask their trail. By dawn, they had put considerable distance between themselves and Simmons' gang. There's a lined shack about an hour from here, Matthew said as pink light crept across the eastern sky. Used to belong to the Circle M ranch before they went under. We can rest there, tend to your injuries properly. Hannah nodded, too exhausted to speak. Her dress was torn and filthy, her wrists and ankles crusted with dried blood where the ropes had cut into her skin. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest after the long ride, yet she remained upright through sheer determination. The lined shack appeared as Matthew had promised, a small, weathered structure nestled against a hillside, partially hidden by a stand of juniper trees. He helped her dismount, supporting her weight as her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. It's not much, he said as he pushed open the door, but it's defensible. The interior was sparse, but clean: a small table with 2 chairs, a narrow cot against one wall, a stone fireplace, and shelves holding basic supplies. Previous occupants kept it stocked, Matthew explained, guiding her to one of the chairs. Unwritten code out here: leave something for the next traveler. Hannah sank gratefully into the chair while Matthew tended to his horse. When he returned, he carried his saddlebags and rifle. I need to check your injuries, he said, his voice professional but gentle. Those wrists need cleaning at minimum. Hannah extended her arms, wincing as he carefully removed the torn edges of her sleeves from where they had stuck to the wounds. How did you come to be in Simmons' path? Matthew asked, clearly trying to distract her as he worked. I was traveling to Tucson, Hannah replied, biting her lip as he dabbed at the raw flesh with a cloth dampened with whiskey from his flask. My father died last month in St. Louis. I'm a teacher. Was offered a position at a new school there. Matthew nodded, his touch surprisingly gentle for such large, capable hands. And Simmons? I stopped in Willow Creek for the night. At dinner in the hotel, I overheard them planning to rob the bank. One of them spotted me listening. Hannah shuddered at the memory. They dragged me out at gunpoint. Simmons said they'd leave me tied up until after the robbery, then come back and decide what to do with me. Everyone watched, but no one helped. Matthew's jaw tightened. People are afraid of men like Simmons. Doesn't make it right. He finished cleaning her wrists and wrapped them in strips torn from a clean shirt from his saddlebag. The makeshift bandages were crude but effective. You should rest, he said, nodding toward the cot. I'll keep watch. We're safe for now, but they won't give up easily. Hannah wanted to protest, to offer to take a turn at watch, but exhaustion overwhelmed her. She barely made it to the cot before collapsing, asleep almost instantly. When she awoke, the light coming through the single small window had changed, suggesting it was late afternoon. A delicious smell filled the small cabin. Matthew was at the fireplace, stirring something in a small pot. Coffee's on the table, he said without turning. Rabbit stew will be ready soon. Found a snare outside with a fresh catch another gift from the last visitor. Hannah sat up slowly, her body stiff and aching but her mind clearer. She took the cup of coffee gratefully, the hot liquid warming her from the inside. How long was I asleep? Most of the day. You needed it. Matthew glanced at her, a slight smile softening his features. Fever broke about an hour ago. Fever? Hannah touched her forehead in surprise. Nothing serious. Exposure and those wounds, I expect. He ladled stew into a tin bowl and brought it to her. Eat slowly. Your stomach needs to adjust. The stew was simple, but delicious tender rabbit meat with wild onions and a few herbs. Hannah hadn't realized how hungry she was until the first bite passed her lips. Thank you, she said when she'd finished. For everything. You saved my life. Matthew shrugged, seeming uncomfortable with her gratitude. Anyone would have done the same. But they didn't, Hannah pointed out softly. You did. A moment of silence stretched between them, filled with something unspoken. Matthew broke it first, moving to check out the window. No sign of pursuit yet, but they're out there. He turned back to her. What were your plans before all this? Hannah set down her empty bowl. I told you teaching in Tucson. Alone? The question seemed to surprise him as much as her. Yes. My mother died when I was 16. My father raised me alone, encouraged my education. A sad smile crossed her face. He was a lawyer, believed women should have the same opportunities as men. When he passed, there was nothing keeping me in St. Louis. Matthew nodded thoughtfully. Brave, heading west alone. Foolish, perhaps, Hannah admitted. I clearly wasn't prepared for the realities. Few are their first time in these territories. Matthew sat across from her at the small table. We'll need to move at first light. Once we reach Tucson, you can contact the authorities about Simmons. Hannah asked. I'll see you safely to Tucson. His tone left no room for argument. After that, I'll backtrack and pick up Simmons' trail again. Hannah wanted to protest that she didn't need an escort, that she'd already imposed enough on this stranger, but the memory of being helpless at the hitching post silenced her objections. Besides, there was something about Matthew Quinn that made her feel secure in a way she hadn't since her father died. I have no way to repay you, she said instead. Matthew's eyes met hers, steady and clear. Not asking for payment, Miss Parker. Just doing what needs doing. That night, despite her protests, Matthew insisted she keep the cot while he settled on the floor near the door, rifle within easy reach. Hannah watched him in the dim firelight, this enigmatic man who had appeared from nowhere to save her. His profile was strong, features carved by wind and sun into something both hard and handsome. There was sadness there too, etched around his eyes the loss of his brother, perhaps, or other sorrows he hadn't shared. She fell asleep pondering the strange twist of fate that had brought them together, wondering what tomorrow would bring. Dawn arrived with a soft golden light filtering through the window. Hannah woke to find Matthew already up, checking his weapons and packing their meager supplies. Any sign of them? She asked, smoothing her wrinkled dress as best she could. Not yet, but we shouldn't press our luck. He handed her a cup of coffee and some jerky. Breakfast. We'll eat on the trail. Within half an hour, they were mounted on Thunder and heading south toward Tucson. Matthew kept them off the main trails, choosing instead to travel cross-country through rocky terrain where their tracks would be difficult to follow. They spoke little during the morning, both scanning the horizon for any sign of pursuit. By midday, the landscape had begun to change, the hills giving way to more desert terrain punctuated by saguaro cacti reaching toward the cloudless sky. The heat was intense, and Hannah was grateful for the canteen Matthew frequently passed to her. How much farther to Tucson? She asked during a brief stop to rest the horse. 3 days, keeping to this pace and route, Matthew replied, scanning the horizon with narrowed eyes. Less if we risked the main road, but I don't trust it. Hannah nodded, understanding his caution. Tell me about your brother, she said impulsively. Matthew stiffened slightly, his back to her as he adjusted Thunder's saddle. For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Michael was 4 years younger, he finally said, his voice low. Always the optimistic one. Saw the best in everyone. A sad smile crossed his face. He was a doctor, traveling west to start a practice in California. I'm sorry, Hannah said softly. Matthew nodded once, acknowledging her sympathy, without looking at her. We should move on. They continued southward, the rhythm of thunder's hooves marking time as the sun arced across the sky. By late afternoon, dark clouds had begun to gather in the west, and a coolness crept into the air. Storm coming, Matthew observed. We need shelter. There's a canyon ahead with some caves if I remember right. The first fat raindrops began to fall as they entered the canyon, a narrow passage between towering red rock walls. Matthew guided Thunder toward a dark opening about 15 feet up a scree slope. He dismounted and helped Hannah down, then led the horse carefully up the loose rock to the cave entrance. The space inside was surprisingly large, the floor relatively flat and dry. Matthew unsaddled Thunder while Hannah gathered what dry wood she could find near the entrance before the rain intensified. You've been here before, she observed as Matthew expertly built a small fire well back from the cave opening where the smoke would disperse through natural cracks in the ceiling. Once. Few years back. He didn't elaborate further. The storm intensified outside, rain falling in sheets while lightning illuminated the canyon in brilliant flashes. Inside, the cave grew cozy with a small fire's warmth. Matthew produced a packet of coffee and a small pot from his saddlebags, and soon the rich aroma filled the space. Hannah watched him move about the cave with easy efficiency, this man who had so suddenly become her protector. In the firelight, with his guard slightly lowered, she could see glimpses of the person beneath the hard exterior, someone capable of tenderness despite the harsh life he led. You're staring, Miss Parker, Matthew said without looking up from the fire. Hannah felt heat rise to her cheeks. I was just thinking how strange life can be. 2 days ago, I was certain I would die tied to that post. Now I'm here. Matthew glanced up, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. Life out here changes quick, for better or worse. Have you always been a bounty hunter? She asked. He shook his head. Ranched with my father in Colorado until he died. Then drifted, took work where I could find it. Army scout for a while. Marshal in a small town until politics got in the way. His mouth twisted slightly. Started tracking men for bounty after Michael died. Found I had a talent for it. And after Simmons? Hannah asked softly. What then? Matthew was silent for a long moment, pouring coffee into 2 tin cups before answering. Haven't thought much beyond that. Something in his tone suggested this wasn't entirely true, but Hannah didn't press. She accepted the cup he offered, their fingers brushing briefly in the exchange. A small jolt passed through her at the contact, surprising in its intensity. The storm raged outside as they ate a simple meal of jerky softened in coffee and hardtack from Matthew's provisions. The conversation flowed more easily now, with Hannah sharing stories of her teaching in St. Louis and Matthew occasionally offering tales from his travels that made her laugh despite herself. As the fire burned low and the storm showed no signs of abating, Hannah found herself reluctant for the evening to end. There was something about this cave, cut off from the world by the storm, that created an intimacy neither had expected. We should get some rest, Matthew finally said, adding the last of their gathered wood to the fire. Storm might keep Simmons' men from tracking us, but we shouldn't linger come morning. He arranged his bedroll near the cave entrance and offered Hannah his saddle as a pillow for hers near the fire. Despite the hard ground, exhaustion soon pulled her toward sleep. Just before she drifted off, she heard Matthew's voice, soft in the darkness. I'm glad I found you in time, Hannah. It was the first time he'd used her given name. The storm had passed by morning, leaving the air fresh and the desert briefly transformed. Tiny wildflowers had appeared overnight, dotting the landscape with surprising color. They set out early, Matthew more vigilant than ever as they crossed the increasingly open terrain. By midday, they spotted a plume of dust on the horizon behind them. "Riders," Matthew said grimly. "At least 3, moving fast." Hannah felt fear clutch at her heart. "Simmons." "Likely." Matthew urged thunder into a faster pace. "There's a trading post about 10 miles ahead. We might find help there." They rode hard, but the dust cloud behind them grew steadily larger. Thunder was tiring after days of carrying double, his pace slowing despite Matthew's urgings. "He's done his best," Hannah said, feeling the great horse's labored breathing beneath them. "We can't outrun them much longer." Matthew's arm tightened around her waist. "I won't let them take you again." The fierce protectiveness in his voice warmed something inside her, even as fear threatened to overwhelm her. The trading post appeared in the distance, a cluster of adobe buildings with a corral and several wagons visible. As they approached, Matthew shouted a warning to the people visible in the yard. "Outlaws coming. Simmons' gang." His words caused immediate action. Men grabbed rifles, women hurried inside, and someone ran to open the gate of the small stockade surrounding the main buildings. Matthew rode straight in, dismounting quickly and helping Hannah down. "My name's Matthew Quinn," he told a gray-bearded man who appeared to be in charge. "This is Miss Parker. Wade Simmons and his gang are after us. They're the ones hit the Baldwin Creek stage last winter." The man's eyes narrowed. "We heard about that massacre. I'm Harmon. I run this place." He gestured to the approaching dust cloud. "How many?" "At least 3, possibly more," Matthew replied, leading Thunder toward the water trough. "Miss Parker witnessed them planning a bank robbery. They left her to die." Harmon nodded grimly. "We don't take kindly to men who mistreat women. You'll have our help, Quinn." Within minutes, the trading post had transformed into a small fortress. 6 men with rifles took positions behind barrels and wagons, while others moved horses into the stables. Hannah was ushered inside the main building by Harmon's wife, a kind-faced woman who immediately set about treating her injuries properly. "Your man out there," Mrs. Harmon said as she applied a soothing salve to Hannah's wrists. "He looks at you like my Edward looked at me 40 years ago." "He's not my," Hannah began, then stopped, remembering the warmth of Matthew's arm around her waist, the gentleness in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. "We barely know each other." Mrs. Harmon smiled knowingly. "Some souls recognize each other right away, dear. No time needed." Before Hannah could respond, shouting erupted outside. She rushed to the window to see 4 riders approaching the stockade gates, which had been closed and barricaded. Wade Simmons was at their head, his red beard and bulky frame unmistakable even at a distance. Matthew stood at the center of the yard, rifle in hand, but pointed at the ground. Harmon and 4 other men flanked him, their weapons more obviously at the ready. "Simmons," Matthew called out when the riders were within earshot. "You're wanted for murder and robbery in 3 territories. Surrender now, and you'll get a fair trial." Simmons' laugh carried clearly to where Hannah watched. "And who the hell are you to make demands? Hand over the woman, and we'll ride away peaceful-like." "The woman is under my protection," Matthew replied, his voice steady. "And I'm the man who's going to bring you in dead or alive." Awful confident for a man about to die, Simmons snarled, his hand moving toward his holster. What happened next unfolded so quickly that Hannah could barely follow it. Gunfire erupted from both sides, men diving for cover, shouts and curses filling the air. She saw Matthew roll behind a water barrel as bullets splintered the wood around him. One of Simmons' men fell from his horse, clutching his chest. Another took a bullet to the shoulder but kept firing. Simmons himself seemed untouched, firing methodically at the defenders. Hannah couldn't bear to simply watch. Ignoring Mrs. Harmon's protests, She grabbed a loaded shotgun from a rack near the door and stepped onto the porch. From this elevated position, she had a clear view of the battle and of Simmons working his way toward where Matthew had taken cover. Without hesitation, Hannah raised the shotgun and fired both barrels into the ground near Simmons' horse. The animal reared in panic, throwing Simmons to the ground and leaving him exposed. Matthew seized the opportunity, darting from cover to level his rifle at the fallen outlaw. "It's over, Simmons. Drop the gun." For a tense moment, it seemed Simmons might still try to shoot his way out. Then, seeing his remaining men either wounded or surrendering, he slowly released his revolver. "This ain't finished, bounty hunter," he growled as Matthew approached cautiously. "For you it is." Matthew kicked the weapon away and quickly bound Simmons' hands behind his back. Only then did he look up and see Hannah on the porch with the shotgun. A mixture of admiration and exasperation crossed his face. "Thought I told you to stay inside," he called. Hannah lowered the empty shotgun. "You looked like you could use some help." A small smile tugged at his lips despite the gravity of the situation. "Reckon I did at that." In the aftermath, one of Simmons' men was dead, another seriously wounded, and a third surrendered without further resistance. Harmon had taken a bullet to the arm but insisted it was just a graze. None of the other defenders were seriously hurt. Simmons and his surviving men were secured in a storeroom until they could be transported to the nearest marshal's office. A young man was dispatched immediately to ride for the law in Tucson, which Harmon informed them was only a day's ride away. That evening, after the wounded had been tended and the dead outlaw buried, the trading posts celebrated their victory with a simple but hearty meal. Hannah found herself seated beside Matthew, who had been unusually quiet since the gunfight ended. "Are you all right?" she asked softly, noticing how he barely touched his food. "Fine," he replied automatically, then seemed to reconsider. "No, that's not true. I've been tracking Simmons for so long, focused on avenging Michael." He looked at her, something vulnerable in his expression. "I never expected to find something worth looking forward to after." Hannah's heart quickened. "And have you? Found something?" Matthew's hand found hers beneath the table, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I believe I might have. If she were interested in a worn-out bounty hunter with few prospects." "Perhaps she sees more than that," Hannah replied softly. "Perhaps she sees a man of honor and courage. A man who cuts ropes and offers safety when others look away." His blue eyes held hers, a dawning hope visible within them. "The teaching position in Tucson, is that still your plan?" Hannah considered the question seriously. "It was my plan when I had nothing else. Now." She turned her hand to intertwine her fingers with his. "Now I find myself open to new possibilities." The marshal arrived from Tucson the following day with 3 deputies. After hearing accounts from multiple witnesses, he formally arrested Simmons and his men for murder, attempted murder, and numerous other charges. "They'll hang for sure," he told Matthew as they loaded the prisoners onto a wagon. "The bounty's yours, Quinn. You can collect it at my office when you get to town." Matthew nodded, but Hannah could tell his mind was elsewhere. When the lawmen had departed with their prisoners, he found her packing her few belongings in preparation for the final leg of their journey. "Hannah," he said, standing in the doorway with his hat in his hands. "Before we reach Tucson, there's something I need to say." She turned to face him, heart hammering in her chest at the intensity in his eyes. "These past days," he continued, "have changed something in me. I've been living for vengeance since Michael died. Didn't think beyond the next bounty, the next trail." He took a step closer. "Then I found you tied to that post, and suddenly I was living for something else entirely." Hannah's breath caught in her throat. "Matthew." "I know it's fast," he said quickly. "Too fast, maybe. We've known each other less than a week. But out here, life doesn't wait. Death comes quick and chances for happiness quicker still." He reached for her hand. I don't have much to offer. The bounty on Simmons will give us a start, but I'm not a wealthy man. I don't need wealth, Hannah whispered. Matthew's eyes brightened with hope. What I'm trying to say, poorly, is that I believe I'm falling in love with you, Hannah Parker. And if you could see your way clear to giving me a chance to prove myself worthy of you. Hannah silenced him by stepping forward and placing her fingers gently against his lips. You proved yourself worthy the moment you cut me free and said, "Ride with me to safety." Everything since has only confirmed what I felt even then. And what was that? He asked, his voice rough with emotion. That you were a man I could trust with my life. She smiled up at him. And, perhaps, someday with my heart. Matthew's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. Someday soon, I hope. Very soon, she agreed as his lips found hers in a kiss that held both tenderness and promise. They arrived in Tucson 3 days later, no longer fugitives, but still traveling together. Hannah sent a letter to the school board explaining her delay and confirming her acceptance of the teaching position. Matthew collected the substantial bounty on Wade Simmons and purchased a small plot of land on the outskirts of town. 6 months later, they were married in the newly built schoolhouse where Hannah taught. Matthew had established himself as a respectable rancher, though his tracking skills were occasionally called upon by the local law when particularly dangerous fugitives needed pursuing. On their wedding night, as they stood on the porch of their modest but comfortable home watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson, Hannah leaned against her husband's solid chest. Do you ever think about how differently our lives might have gone if you hadn't ridden into Willow Creek that day? She asked. Matthew's arms tightened around her. I try not to. Some things are too painful to contemplate. I think we would have found each other somehow, Hannah said with conviction. Some things are meant to be. Matthew turned her in his arms, his blue eyes reflecting the sunset glow. I like to think so too. Fate may have tied you to that post, but it was love that truly set us both free. As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Hannah rose on tiptoe to kiss the man who had become her protector, her partner, and now her husband. From the most desperate moment of her life had come its greatest joy, proof that even in the wild and untamed West, love could bloom from the harshest circumstances and transform two solitary lives into one shared journey.